Hello, I am the man from Orion, and today we are going to talk about Antifa. Who the hell is Antifa? These guys run around in their black pajamas, starting all kinds of crap everywhere they go. Well, start with a little bit of history on who Antifa is. Antifa started essentially back in the 1920s and teens. And these were the people that were fighting Mussolini's people as back before Mussolini was the leader of Italy, when he was just a small-time street thug with a gang, basically. These were the people that came out to meet that challenge. These are also the same people that were fighting Hitler's brown shirts when Hitler's brown shirts were, in effect, trying to bully and thug their way into taking over Germany. Now, unfortunately, they were unsuccessful in both accounts. And had they been successful, history would probably be quite different. Through the 70s and the 80s, they were fighting KKK, neo-Nazis, skinheads, mostly in Europe. They really didn't have any agenda. This was oppressive, bad forces. And keep in mind, in the 70s and 80s, people's memories were still there for World War II. We were only about 35, 40 years out of World War II at that point. People that were growing up were in their 50s and 60s. And memories of those types of wars were still very strong. Fast forward to 2016, 2017, Antifa now is nothing of what Antifa was back then. You read their articles, the articles they themselves actually publish. You listen to the radio interviews. You listen to their videos they put online. And these are college-educated people. These are college-educated people that, quite frankly, don't know what end of a gun a bullet comes out of. All they know how to do is fill water balloons with fecal matter and pee, and then carry that with them so they can go throw it at people at a protest. These people don't come to these protests to protest. They come to these protests to fight. They claim that they're just protecting themselves. You do not bring water balloons filled with urine to protect yourself. There's only one reason you can do that. These same people will refer to being tear gassed by the police as a biological attack or a chemical weapon attack. Well, tell me what the difference is between someone throwing a water balloon filled with piss on you and tear gas. If you're going to put it to that extreme, what's the difference? It's essentially a biological attack. You're doing the same thing in a very narrow, constricted view of putting it. In fact, what you're doing is probably worse. The issue with Antifa at this point is now they are funded by George Soros. Now, George Soros was funding the BLM. He pulled his funding from the BLM. BLM has kind of had their 15 minutes worth of fame. They've soured so much in the U.S. media because of the looting and the rioting and the burning down of houses and businesses, blocking traffic on freeways, that they needed a new vehicle, so to speak, for his agenda, and that is Antifa. George Soros himself, this is someone who has spent his entire career in a pursuit to make more money. And he uses a good chunk of that money to advance his political agendas worldwide. This is not someone who is focused just on North America. He has had his fingers in Eastern European, Western European governments, African governments, South American governments, to the point where several of these governments have almost failed because of money he has pumped into opposition groups, violent or otherwise, to advance his agendas. He is essentially at war with Israel, and it just as a side note, he is Jewish, but Israel, in effect, he has actually taken and gone worldwide to block Israeli companies from getting contracts. And mind you, a lot of these Israeli companies are actually government-run companies by the Israeli government, to block their contracts, essentially to cut off their supply of money. He is known as the man who broke the Bank of England when, during a financial crisis, he short-sold some futures on British currency. And when he did that, in effect bankrupted the bank. The government had to come in and save it. He made a bunch of money, but a lot of other people didn't. And this is the type of person he is. He has spent his career as a what's in it for me. And this is the person that's feeding these organizations that are supposed to be helping the oppressed. Now, Antifa has gone out of their way at this point to start trouble. The example everybody's using is Charlottesville and what happened there. Now, in Charlottesville, you had a mixed bag of organizations of some of the worst hate groups on the planet. Neo-Nazis, KKK, you name it, they were there. They're represented. These are people that 99.9% of this country want absolutely nothing to do with. But part of being an American is that our Bill of Rights says that they have the right to say what they want to say. And if they pull a permit and are legally allowed to protest, they have the right to say these things, just as the left has the right to pull a permit and say what they want to say. That is part of America. That is our Bill of Rights. You have that right. I have it. You have it. Everybody has it. So what they did in Charlottesville, they were pretty much left alone the first night, on Friday night. Saturday, everything was supposed to wind up by about 2 o'clock. They were back in the park. The police actually closed all the entrances and exits to the park except for one. A lot of these organizations, Antifa and otherwise, all congregated at that one entrance. And it was at that point they decided to close the park and get everybody out of the park, which was, unfortunately, all the white supremacist people. And when they marched them out through a crowd of counter-protesters. Well, when you put protesters and counter-protesters that are angry at each other that close together, of course, all hell broke loose. Things downtown had gotten to, because they closed the park, they basically just moved into town. There was a road open, which was the infamous road that this guy drove down, that was not supposed to be open. Normally it's always closed when any kind of events are going on. The police did not shut it down, which gave this person the ability to drive his car into a group of protesters, and unfortunately someone lost their life. The person who did this is going to jail for the rest of his life, as he should. And you're not going to find anybody, except for maybe some really, really whacked out individuals, that believe that he shouldn't go to jail for the rest of his life. And that's what people seem to be having a hard time understanding, is that when I say 99.9% of this country, I mean it. You've got a few 100,000 people on the outside fringes on either side of this long line that are doing this, and everybody else is in between. And you had, when President Trump came out and said what he said, and then was immediately attacked for not saying how terrible these individual groups were. One, the first day he did not have all the facts. Now, I want you to keep in mind, it wasn't that terribly long ago that the president didn't comment on this kind of stuff. It wasn't really until Obama was in office that the president started sticking his nose into events that don't necessarily affect him. Trump waited till the second day. He did list off these groups, but he said there was evil on both sides, and he got tore apart for that. But the fact of the matter, and then he said there was very fine individuals on both sides there. And he was correct. And what he meant by that was not everybody there was Antifa. Not everybody there was BLM, and not everybody there was a neo-Nazi or a KKK member. You had people that just genuinely wanted this monument to stay in the park, or at the very least be taken and moved to a museum. And then you had people on the other side that wanted it taken down, but were willing to do it through the proper channels, and were there more to protest the white trash that was there than anything. They're not violent people. They're just exercising their rights as Americans. Well, we all know what happened. Now, a week later, there was a presidential visit to Phoenix, where the police there, dealing with a much more confined space, were not going to put up with any crap. They did not put up with anything. Once rocks and bottles started to fly, they fired tear gas into the Antifa people. And mind you, the Antifa people were the people that were instigating it, and they were the only people in front of them. These Antifa people were angry at the police, calling them Nazis, calling them fascists, because they couldn't get to the Trump people coming out of the convention center after the presidential visit. So they took their frustrations on the police. The police responded immediately. Nobody got hurt. No property was damaged. They managed to disperse this crowd, get everybody safely back to their cars. There was 4 arrests, and that was the end of it. They had used dump trucks to block the roads to prevent another Charlottesville from happening from either side. They handled it the way it should have been handled. And mind you, this was not just a protest over a statue. This was actually a presidential visit. And if anybody has been in a city where there is a president visiting at that time, you cannot get near those areas. The fact that you could even get near the area was quite impressive. So these same people, Antifa, BLM, some other alt-left groups, protested to the city government. They wanted an investigation, saying that they were treated unfairly, that they were victims of police brutality because the police did what they did. They made such a stink at the city council meeting, talking over anybody who wanted to try to support the police, to the point where they said, nope, we're not doing an investigation, and they canceled the whole thing. This was a Democratic mayor that did this. Someone who actually leans left. The issue we're running into now is Antifa is labeling anybody who does not view the world through their narrow scope as a neo-Nazi, as a fascist. They labeled Ben Carlson a white supremacist. The chief of housing and urban development, who is a black man. Evidently, they don't look at pictures of who they decide are neo-Nazis or not. This is it's a domestic terrorist organization. It's funded by a man who has no other interest other than making money, other than turning the world into what he views as the idyllic society. That is Antifa. These are just a couple of the latest examples, but more is to come. I am Man from Orion. You have a good evening.